The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across my parents' mahogany dining table, as my sister Diana's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Face it, Sophia. You're nothing but a broke loser playing dress-up in thrift store clothes." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of accumulated resentment. What she didn't know was that in exactly 37 minutes, my bodyguard Caleb would walk through those oak doors carrying a magazine that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 months earlier, I was sitting in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Chicago, staring at my laptop screen as another rejection email landed in my inbox. "Thank you for your interest in the junior marketing position, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." I closed the laptop harder than necessary, the sound echoing off the bare walls of my one-bedroom place. The apartment wasn't much, 800 square feet of chipped paint and creaky floorboards, but it was mine. Well, technically, it belonged to Mrs. Chen, my 70-year-old landlord who lived downstairs and made the most incredible dumplings I'd ever tasted. She'd been patient with my late rent payments over the past 6 months, always accepting my promises with a knowing smile and an extra container of food. My phone buzzed, a text from Diana. "Family dinner Sunday. Mom's making her famous pot roast. Try to look presentable for once." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Diana had always had a talent for making invitations sound like obligations wrapped in insults. She lives in Winnetka now, married to a hedge fund manager named Brad, driving a white Tesla Model S and posting Instagram stories from their lake house every weekend. Meanwhile, I was rationing pasta packets and pretending that instant coffee was a lifestyle choice rather than a financial necessity. But there was something Diana didn't know. Something nobody in my family knew. 6 months ago, I'd been working late at Brennan & Associates, a small marketing firm where I'd landed a temporary contract position. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, but it was experience, and I was desperate for any kind of foothold in the industry. I was organizing files in the conference room when I overheard 2 executives talking about a tech startup that was hemorrhaging money on social media advertising. "They're burning through $250,000 a month on Facebook ads with a 2% conversion rate," one of them said, shaking his head. "It's painful to watch." I knew that company, StreamTech Solutions. They made productivity apps for remote teams, and their ads had been flooding my timeline for months. But here's the thing. Their targeting was completely wrong. They were advertising workplace productivity tools to college students and retirees, while completely missing the demographic of actual remote workers and small business owners. That night, I went home and spent 14 hours straight creating a comprehensive marketing strategy for StreamTech. I analyzed their current campaigns, identified their target audience gaps, created detailed buyer personas, and drafted new ad copy that spoke directly to the pain points of remote team managers. I mapped out their customer journey, designed A/B testing protocols, and even created mock-ups for landing pages that would actually convert. When I finished, I had a 43-page document that I was convinced could transform their business. The question was, what do I do with it? I could have sent it to Brennan & Associates and hoped they'd pass it along to StreamTech as part of their pitch process. But something told me to be bolder. So I did something that still makes my palms sweat when I think about it. I found the CEO of StreamTech Solutions on LinkedIn. Marcus Rivera, 34 years old, former Google product manager who'd left to start his own company. His last post was from 2 weeks earlier, and he looked exhausted. The caption read, "Building AI. Startup is like trying to solve a puzzle while riding a roller coaster in the dark. Some days you question everything." I crafted a message that was direct but not pushy. "Hi, Marcus. I've been following StreamTech's journey and noticed some opportunities in your current marketing approach. I've put together some analysis and recommendations that I think could significantly improve your conversion rates, Would you be open to a 15-minute call to discuss? I attached a 5-page executive summary of my findings and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. He responded within 3 hours. Sophia, your analysis is spot on. We've been struggling with exactly the issues you've identified. Can we talk tomorrow at 2 p.m.? That phone call changed everything. Marcus wasn't just interested in my recommendations. He was fascinated by the depth of research I'd done on his industry and his specific challenges. We talked for an hour instead of 15 minutes. He asked questions that showed he understood both the technical and strategic aspects of what I was proposing. I have to ask, he said toward the end of our conversation, where are you working now? I explained my situation at Brennan & Associates, how I'd discovered his company's advertising challenges through overheard conversations and late-night research sessions. What would it take to get you to consult for us directly? He asked. The question caught me off guard. I'm not sure I understand. I mean as an independent consultant. We need someone who thinks like you do, who can see patterns and opportunities that we're missing. Our current marketing agency charges us $12,000 a month and delivers reports that tell us what we already know. You've shown us problems and solutions we never even considered. My heart was racing. What kind of arrangement are you thinking of? Let's start with a 3-month contract, $25,000 a month, with performance bonuses based on conversion rate improvements. If you can deliver even half of what your analysis suggests, you'll have earned every penny. I nearly dropped the phone. $25,000 a month was more than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined. There's one condition, Marcus continued. This has to stay confidential. We're in the middle of raising a Series B funding round, and we can't have our current marketing agency or our investors knowing we're working with an outside consultant until we see results. That's how I became StreamTech's secret weapon. For the next 3 months, I worked 18-hour days. I redesigned their entire customer acquisition funnel, created targeted campaigns for 7 different audience segments, and developed a content marketing strategy that positioned Marcus as a thought leader in the remote workspace. I worked from coffee shops and libraries, using encrypted communication channels and pseudonyms in all official documentation. The results were extraordinary. In the first month, their conversion rate improved from 2% to 11%. Their cost per acquisition dropped by 63%. By month 2, they were generating more qualified leads than they could handle. Month 3 brought their first profitable quarter since the company's founding. But the real breakthrough came when Marcus called me on a Tuesday evening in late October. Sophia, I need to tell you something. The numbers you've delivered aren't just impressive. They're revolutionary. Our Series B investors have taken notice. We've got Goldman Sachs asking questions about our marketing strategy. Forbes wants to interview me about our growth trajectory. My chest tightened. That's incredible, Marcus. Here's the thing, he continued. I want to offer you something bigger. We're about to close our funding round at $120 million valuation. I want you to become our chief marketing officer. Full-time equity package, base salary of $250,000 plus bonuses. The number seemed impossible. 6 months ago, I'd been rejected for a $35,000 marketing assistant position. But there's more, Marcus said. The Forbes interview? They want to feature our marketing transformation as a case study. They're calling it the secret strategy that transformed a struggling startup into Silicon Valley's hottest growth story. Your work, Sophia. Your strategy is going to be on the cover of Forbes. I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by empty takeout containers and unpaid bills, trying to process what he was telling me. The article comes out next Monday, he said. And Sophia? They're naming you as the architect behind our success. The marketing genius who turned everything around. After we hung up, I sat in silence for 20 minutes. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Mrs. Chen and paid my rent 3 months in advance, along with a bonus for all the times she'd been patient with me. That weekend, I went shopping. Not at thrift stores or discount retailers, but at the kind of boutiques I'd always walked past without entering. I bought a black Armani dress that fit perfectly, Italian leather shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and had my hair done at a salon where they served champagne instead of coffee. On Sunday morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, looking at a version of myself I barely recognized. The woman staring back looked confident, successful, and powerful. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged in the same room as my sister. But I kept the secret. As far as my family knew, I was still struggling, still temping, still the disappointment they'd always expected me to be. The family dinner was set for 6 o'clock at my parents' house in Oak Park. The same house where Diana and I had grown up, where family photos chronicled her academic achievements and my artistic ambitions that never quite materialized into career success. The house where every gathering felt like a performance review where I always came up short. I arrived early, wanting to help my mother Charlotte with the preparations. She was in the kitchen, wearing her favorite apron and stirring gravy, with practiced efficiency. "Sophia, sweetheart," she said, looking up with surprise. "You look different, beautiful. Is that a new dress?" "Thanks, Mom. I thought it was time to make an effort." She studied my face with the intensity that only mothers possess. "You seem different too, more confident. Are things getting better for you?" Before I could answer, Diana's voice echoed from the front hall. "We're here. Sorry we're late. Brad had to take a call from Hong Kong." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Diana swept into the kitchen wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit and carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Brad followed behind her, checking his phone and offering distracted greetings. "Sophia," Diana said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound supportive but couldn't quite hide her surprise. "Look at you. Someone's been shopping at... Where did you get that dress? It's actually quite nice." "Thank you," I said simply. Dad emerged from his study, where he'd been watching the news with the volume turned up louder than necessary, a habit he'd developed since retiring from his law practice. Arthur Kingston had spent 40 years as a corporate attorney, and he still carried himself with the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to winning arguments. "My girls," he said, embracing us both. "It's good to have everyone together." We moved to the dining room, where Mom had set the table with her good china and the silverware that only appeared for special occasions. The pot roast smelled incredible, filling the house with the kind of warmth that made you forget about everything waiting outside these walls. For the first 30 minutes, the conversation was pleasant. Diana talked about their upcoming trip to Tuscany. Brad shared details about a recent golf tournament, and Dad offered commentary on the current political climate. I contributed when asked direct questions, but mostly listened, observing the familiar dynamics of a family that had learned to navigate around uncomfortable topics. Then Diana opened her second bottle of wine. The wine had loosened Diana's tongue, and with it came the familiar pattern of passive-aggressive observations disguised as sisterly concern. She swirled the burgundy liquid in her glass, studying me with the calculating gaze of someone preparing to deliver what she considered tough love. "So, Sophia," she began, her voice carrying that sing-song quality that always preceded her most, cutting remarks. "Mom mentioned you're still doing temp work. How's that going for you?" The question landed exactly as intended, a small blade wrapped in silk. Around the table, the energy shifted. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mom busied herself adjusting napkins that didn't need adjusting, and Brad suddenly found his phone fascinating. "It's going well," I replied evenly, cutting a piece of pot roast with deliberate precision. Diana's laugh was light and airy, the kind that sounded like music but felt like nails on glass. "Oh, sweetie, you don't have to pretend with us. We're family. There's no shame in struggling. Well, I mean, there shouldn't be shame. Some people just aren't cut out for the corporate world." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. And some people find their own path. Of course. They do! Diana's agreement was enthusiastic and entirely condescending, like my friend Jessica from college. Remember Jessica, Mom? She tried the whole corporate thing for years, kept getting passed over for promotions, couldn't quite make it work. Now she's a yoga instructor and she's much happier. Less money, obviously, but money isn't everything. The comparison stung exactly as she'd intended. Jessica Martinez had been our high school valedictorian, full ride to Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude with a business degree. If Diana was positioning her as the cautionary tale of corporate failure, where did that leave me? Speaking of money, Brad interjected, clearly trying to steer the conversation towards safer territory. Did you see that article about those tech startups burning through venture capital? Crazy numbers they're throwing around these days. My pulse quickened. StreamTech's funding round had been covered in several publications over the past month, though Marcus had been careful to keep the specifics of our marketing strategy confidential until the Forbes piece. Oh, those Silicon Valley types, Diana waved dismissively. Half of them are just lucky idiots with good timing. Most of those companies will be bankrupt in 5 years. Dad nodded sagely. During my career, I saw plenty of young entrepreneurs convinced they were the next big thing. 90% of startups fail within the first 3 years. It's a statistical reality. Exactly, Diana continued, warming to the theme. Real success comes from proven strategies. Established companies, traditional career paths, building something solid over time. Not chasing get-rich-quick schemes or thinking you can revolutionize entire industries with some app idea. She turned back to me, her eyes bright with wine and the particular cruelty that comes from someone who's never questioned their place in the world. That's what I keep trying to tell Sophia. She needs to be more realistic about her limitations. Stop dreaming about some fantasy career and focus on finding something stable, even if it's not glamorous. The word limitations hung in the air like smoke. I could feel my mother's discomfort radiating across the table, Dad's diplomatic lawyer, instincts warring with his desire to avoid family conflict, Brad's obvious wish to be anywhere else. Diana, Mom said quietly, maybe we could talk No, it's fine, Diana interrupted, her voice gaining momentum. Someone needs to say what we're all thinking. Sophia, you're 31 years old. You've been figuring things out for over a decade. At some point, you have to accept that maybe you're just not meant for big career success. And that's okay. Not everyone can be a high achiever. The dining room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. The same clock that had marked time through countless family dinners, celebrations, and disappointments. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the familiar shame rising in my chest like floodwater. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the knowledge of what was coming tomorrow. Maybe it was the memory of Marcus's voice telling me that Forbes wanted to feature my work. Maybe it was simply that I'd spent too many years allowing Diana's version of reality to define my worth. You know what's interesting about limitations, Diana, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Sometimes they exist more in other people's minds than in reality. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Meaning? Meaning that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes the people we underestimate are actually achieving things we can't even see. Diana's smile was patronizing. Oh, honey, I know you need to stay positive. That's admirable, really. But at some point, optimism becomes a delusion. You can't just become successful. Brad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should… No. Let her talk, Diana said, gesturing toward me with her wine glass. I want to hear about these mysterious achievements. What exactly have you been accomplishing that we can't see? Because from where I'm sitting, you're living in a studio apartment, working temporary jobs, and borrowing money from Mom and Dad to make ends meet. The accusation about borrowing money was false. I'd been financially independent since college. But correcting her would only give her more ammunition. Instead, I met her gaze steadily. You're right that success isn't always visible from the outside, I said. Sometimes the most important work happens behind the scenes. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from people who don't need to announce every achievement on social media. Diana's laugh was sharp now, all pretense of affection stripped away. Behind the scenes? Sophia, you're not a secret agent. You're a temp worker who can't hold down a real job. Stop trying to make failure sound mysterious and strategic. Diana, Dad's voice carried a warning, but she was beyond caring about diplomatic boundaries. Someone has to be honest with her, she continued, her voice rising slightly. Look around. This table. Sophia. Mom and Dad built a beautiful life together. Dad had a successful law practice. Mom raised 2 daughters and managed to maintain her own career in real estate. I married well, built a network, and established myself in the community. We all found our places in the world. She paused to take another sip of wine, letting her words sink in. But you? You've spent the past decade drifting from one dead-end job to another, living in apartments that most people would consider starter homes, shopping at thrift stores, and convincing yourself that somehow this is all leading somewhere meaningful. When does the delusion end? The room was completely silent now. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking. Mom's face was pale, Dad was staring at his plate, and Brad looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Diana wasn't finished. I love you, Sophia, but love means being honest. You're 31 years old, and you have nothing to show for it. No career, no relationship, no prospects, no plan. You're what people politely call still figuring things out. But what they actually mean is that you're a broke loser who can't get her life together. The words hit like a physical blow. Broke loser. There it was, delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the warmth of liquid nitrogen. I felt something crack inside. Me, not break exactly, but shift. Like a foundation settling before it becomes stronger. You think I'm a broke loser, I said quietly. I think you're my sister, and I want what's best for you. But yes, if we're being completely honest, your life is a mess. Diana's voice had softened, slightly, as if she realized she'd gone too far but was committed to seeing it through. And sometimes people need to hear hard truths before they can change. I nodded slowly, as if considering her assessment. Around the table, my family watched with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. That's an interesting perspective, I said finally. And I suppose from the outside, I can understand why you'd think that. Diana looked slightly relieved, as if she'd expected more resistance. I'm glad you can see, but here's what I find fascinating about your analysis, I continued, my voice growing stronger. You're so confident in your conclusions based on such limited information. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I glanced at my watch. The gesture was deliberate, calculated. In exactly 12 minutes, my phone would ring. In exactly 23 minutes, if everything went according to plan, Caleb would walk through the front door carrying tomorrow's Forbes magazine. I mean that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones who surprise us most. Diana's expression was shifting from confused to annoyed. Sophia, you're not making sense. Are you saying there's something about your life that we don't know? I smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Oh, Diana, there's so much about my life that you don't know. The silence that followed my words was pregnant with possibility and confusion. Diana's wine glass hung suspended halfway between the table and her lips, her expression caught between skepticism and curiosity. Dad had abandoned all pretense of eating and was studying me with the sharp attention he'd once reserved for cross-examinations. Mom's hands were folded in her lap, but I could see her fingers twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since I was a child. Brad, ever the hedge fund manager, was the first to break the silence with a question that cut straight to the heart of what everyone was thinking. What exactly are you saying, Sophia? Before I could answer, My phone buzzed against the mahogany table. The caller ID read, Marcus Rivera, Stream Tech, right on schedule. I let it ring twice before answering, maintaining eye contact with Diana throughout. Hi, Marcus, I said, my voice casual despite the electricity crackling through the room. Actually, I'm having dinner with my family right now. Can I call you back in about 30 minutes? Marcus's voice was excited enough that even sitting across the table, Diana could probably hear fragments of his words. Sophia, I know it's Sunday evening, but I had to call. The Forbes piece went live online early. It's already trending on LinkedIn and Twitter. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. That's wonderful news, I replied, still looking at Diana, whose expression was shifting from confused to concerned. I'll review everything when I get home and we can discuss strategy tomorrow. Morning. Wait, before you go, did you see the headline they used? The marketing mastermind who transformed Silicon Valley's fastest-growing startup. They called you a mastermind, Sophia. A mastermind. I could feel 4 pairs of eyes boring into me as I maintained my composure. I appreciate the call, Marcus. Let's talk first thing tomorrow. After hanging up, I placed the phone face down on the table and reached for my water glass, taking a measured sip while my family processed what they'd just witnessed. Diana was the first to recover her voice. Who was that? A client, I said simply. A client? Her tone suggested I'd just claimed to be an astronaut. Sophia, temp workers don't have clients. They have supervisors. Maybe managers if they're lucky. I tilted my head slightly, as if considering her point. You're absolutely right. Temp workers don't typically have clients calling them on Sunday evenings about trending Forbes articles. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Dad leaned forward in his chair, his lawyer instincts fully engaged now. Sophia, what exactly do you do for work? It was such a simple question, one that I'd been deflecting and avoiding for months. But sitting there in my parents' dining room, with Diana's cruel words still echoing off the walls, I realized I was tired of hiding. I'm a marketing consultant, I said. Specifically, I specialize in customer acquisition and conversion optimization for high-growth technology companies. Diana's laugh was automatic, a reflex born of months of thinking she understood the complete picture of my life. Marketing consultant? Sophia, you work at Brennan & Associates filing papers and answering phones. I worked at Brennan & Associates, I corrected. That contract ended 3 months ago. And since then? Mom's voice was gentle, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Since then, I've been working exclusively with StreamTech Solutions, developing and implementing their customer acquisition strategy. Brad straightened in his chair. Even someone who spent his days in hedge funds knew that name. StreamTech? The productivity app company that just closed their Series B? $120 million valuation, I confirmed. They're expecting to hit unicorn status within 18 months. The dining room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had moved closer together. Diana was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between disbelief and dawning horror. That's impossible, she said flatly. Sophia, if you were working with companies like that, we would know. You wouldn't be living in that tiny apartment. You wouldn't be what, Diana? Wouldn't be dressing in thrift store clothes? Wouldn't I be driving a 10-year-old Honda? Wouldn't the family be disappointed? My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it now. You're right. Someone working at that level wouldn't typically live like I've been living, unless they had reasons for keeping their success private. Dad was studying me with the intensity of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew. Why would you keep something like that private? The question deserved an honest answer. I looked around the table at my family, these people who'd known me my entire life but had somehow missed seeing who I'd become, because I wanted to know who I really was when the external markers of success were stripped away, I said. I wanted to understand my own relationship with achievement, with money, with recognition. I wanted to see if I could be happy and confident even when nobody knew what I'd accomplished. Diana's wine glass hit the table harder than necessary. That's ridiculous. That's not how the real world works, Sophia. Success means recognition. It means status. It means showing people what you've achieved. Does it? I asked. Or does real success mean being so secure in your own worth that you don't need external validation to feel valuable? The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front doorbell. Mom started to rise, but I held up a hand. That's for me, actually. Diana's eyes narrowed. What do you mean it's for you? I stood and smoothed my dress, feeling calmer than I had all evening. I took the liberty of having something delivered that might help illustrate my point. The walk to the front door felt like moving through water. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversations, but the words were lost. In the rushing sound of my own heartbeat, through the frosted glass panels, I could see Caleb's familiar silhouette. 6'3", broad shoulders, the kind of presence that made people step aside without even realizing they were doing it. I opened the door to find him dressed in his usual black suit, his expression professional but warm. Caleb Martinez had been many things in his 42 years. Marine Corps reconnaissance, private security for celebrities, personal protection for tech executives. For the past month, he'd been my bodyguard. A precaution Marcus had insisted on after StreamTech's valuation made headlines, and I'd started receiving attention from competitors and journalists. "Good evening, Ms. Kingston," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent that hinted at his childhood in San Antonio. "I have the delivery you requested." In his hands was a manila envelope and what looked like a magazine wrapped in brown paper. "Thank you, Caleb. My family is in the dining room if you'd like to join us." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Are you sure that's wise, given the circumstances?" I smiled. "I think it's exactly what the circumstances require." We walked back to the dining room together, Caleb's presence filling the hallway with quiet authority. When we entered, the conversation stopped abruptly. 4 faces turned toward us with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. "Everyone," I said, "I'd like you to meet Caleb Martinez. Caleb, this is my family. My parents, Charlotte and Arthur, my sister Diana, and her husband Brad." Caleb nodded politely. "Pleasure to meet you all." Diana found her voice first. "I'm sorry. Who exactly are you?" "I provide personal security services for Ms. Kingston," Caleb replied, his tone matter-of-fact. The words hit the room like a small explosion. Personal security. The implications were staggering. Not just the expense, but the need. Who required personal security? Celebrities, politicians, people important enough to be targets. Personal. Security? Dad's voice cracked slightly on the words. "It became necessary after the Forbes article was confirmed for publication," I explained. "Marcus was concerned about potential industrial espionage, journalists, people who might want to leverage my role at StreamTech for their own purposes." Caleb stepped forward and handed me the manila envelope. "The contracts you requested, along with the bank statements and tax documents." I accepted the envelope but didn't open it yet. Instead, I focused on the wrapped magazine in his other hand. "And that's tomorrow's Forbes?" "Advanced copy, as requested. It hits newsstands tomorrow morning, but the online version has already generated significant buzz. I believe the phrase being used is viral content." I took the magazine and slowly unwrapped it, feeling the weight of glossy paper and destiny in my hands. The cover was striking. A bold red background with white text that seemed to leap off the page. "Forbes," I read aloud, featuring the marketing mastermind who transformed Silicon Valley's fastest-growing startup, how Sophia Kingston's secret. Strategy generated 900% growth in 90 days. The room went completely silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. Below the headline was a professional photo I'd taken just last week, me in a navy business suit, standing in StreamTech's modern offices with the San Francisco skyline visible through floor to ceiling. Windows behind me. I looked confident, successful, and powerful. I looked like someone you'd want to do business with, but it was the subtitle that really drove the point home. At 31, Kingston has quietly become one of Silicon Valley's most sought-after marketing strategists, with companies offering seven-figure contracts for her proven methodologies. Diana's face had gone completely white. She was staring at the magazine cover as if it were written in a foreign language she was desperately trying to translate. "This can't be real," she whispered. I opened the magazine to the feature article, which spanned 6 pages and included additional photos of me working with Marcus, charts showing StreamTech's growth trajectory, and quotes from industry leaders calling my approach revolutionary and game-changing. The article details how I identified and solved StreamTech's customer acquisition challenges, I said, my voice steady and professional. It describes the methodology I developed, the results we achieved, and the subsequent job offers I've received. From 12 other companies. I looked up at Diana, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish struggling for air. The reporter also mentions that I've been invited to speak at 3 major marketing conferences next quarter, and that Harvard Business School wants to develop a case study around my work. Caleb cleared his throat politely. "If I may add, Ms. Kingston, your speaking fee for those conferences has been set at $75,000 per appearance." The number hit the room like a physical force. $75,000 for a single speaking engagement. Diana's annual salary as a part-time interior designer was probably less than what I'd earn from one keynote address. Dad was the first to find his voice, and when he spoke, it was with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with shocking revelations in courtrooms. "Sophia," he said slowly, "how long has this been going on?" "The StreamTech contract started 3 months ago," I replied. "But the success happened faster than anyone expected. Within 6 weeks, we'd achieved results that typically take companies years to accomplish." "And the Forbes article?" "Marcus submitted our case study to them 8 weeks ago. They've been researching and writing the piece ever since. Tomorrow, it goes to print in the business section, but the online version is already trending." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. 17,000 shares on LinkedIn in the past hour. The hashtag #JAR Marketing Mastermind is trending. On Twitter, I've received 43 interview requests since 5 o'clock. Brad leaned forward, his hedge fund instincts finally kicking in. "What kind of contract are we talking about with StreamTech?" I glanced at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. $25,000 per month for the initial 3-month contract, with performance bonuses that brought it to $43,000 per month. But that was just the beginning. I opened the manila envelope Caleb had brought and pulled out a legal document. "This is the new contract Marcus offered me last week. Chief Marketing Officer position, base salary of $250,000 annually, plus equity that could be worth several million if StreamTech goes public as expected." The paper rustled as I placed it on the table where everyone could see the official letterhead, the signature lines, the numbers that represented more money than Diana and Brad made combined. "But I haven't signed it yet," I continued, "because I've received more attractive offers." Diana finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "More attractive offers?" I pulled out additional documents from the envelope. "Google wants me to head up customer acquisition for their small business division. $320,000 base salary. Facebook offered me a VP position in their growth marketing department. $400,000 plus stock options. There's also an interesting opportunity with a venture capital firm that wants me to evaluate marketing strategies for their portfolio companies. That one's particularly appealing because it would be mostly consulting work at $1,500 per hour." The numbers were piling up like accusations, each one a knife twist in Diana's perception of reality. I could see her doing the math, realizing that my hourly consulting rate was more than she made in a month. "There's also this," I said, pulling out the final document. It was a bank statement, and I placed it directly in front of Diana. Her eyes scanned the numbers, and I watched her face cycle through disbelief, shock, and something that might have been grief. "That's my current checking account balance," I said matter-of-factly. "The other pages show my investment accounts, retirement, savings, and the emergency fund I've built up over the past 3 months." Diana stared at the papers as if they might disappear if she looked away. The total assets listed were more than her and Brad's combined net worth, despite their fancy house and luxury cars. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice small and confused. "If you have all this, why are you still living in that apartment? Why are you driving that old car? Why do you dress like—" She trailed off, finally understanding the trap she'd walked into. "Like a broken loser?" I finished gently. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that could never be unsaid. Diana's face crumpled as the full weight of her words came crashing back. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment she'd positioned herself as the successful sister lecturing the family failure. "Sophia, she started, then stopped, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass and then thought better of it. I sat back down, my movements deliberate and calm. "You want to know why I chose to live like this when I could afford not to?" It wasn't a question. Everyone at the table was leaning forward now, even Caleb, who had positioned himself near the doorway with the practiced awareness of someone accustomed to reading room dynamics. The apartment, the old car, the thrift store clothes, they were all choices. Conscious decisions based on something I learned about myself during those first few weeks of success. Mom's voice was barely audible. "What did you learn?" I thought about how to explain 3 months of self-discovery in a way that would make sense to people who'd never questioned whether their worth was tied to their possessions. I learned that I'd spent my entire adult life afraid of being judged for not having enough. Not enough money, not enough status, not enough recognition. That fear was driving every career decision, every relationship, every time I walked into a room. Dad nodded slowly. After 40 years of law practice, he understood the weight of other people's expectations. When the StreamTech money started coming in, I continued, my first instinct was to do exactly what Diana described earlier. Buy the expensive car, move to the fancy apartment, wear the designer clothes. I wanted everyone to see that I'd made it, that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. Diana flinched at the word failure, and I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't satisfaction either. But then I realized something that changed everything. If I needed external validation to feel successful, then my success wasn't really mine. It belonged to whoever was validating. Brad cleared his throat. "So you decided to test yourself?" I decided to see if I could be genuinely happy and confident even when nobody knew what I'd achieved. I wanted to know if Sophia Kingston was valuable because of what she'd accomplished, or if what she'd accomplished was valuable because of who Sophia Kingston was. The distinction seemed to resonate with Dad, whose legal mind appreciated the subtle but crucial difference. It became a kind of experiment, I continued. Could I sit in rooms where people underestimated me and still feel secure in my own worth? Could I handle condescension and pity without feeling the need to defend myself? Could I be successful without needing anyone else to know about it? I looked directly at Diana, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. Tonight was the final test. The most difficult one. Because it's one thing to handle strangers underestimating you, but it's something else entirely when it's your own family. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of years of misunderstood dynamics and accumulated resentments. "Diana," I said softly, "you called me a broke loser because that's what you needed me to be. Not because it was true, but because your own sense of success required someone to feel superior to." She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a gentle hand. "I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because I understand it. For most of my 20s, I defined my worth by comparing myself to you. Your achievements made me feel like a failure. Your success highlighted my struggles. Your confidence made my uncertainty more painful. Mom was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to years of watching her daughters navigate a relationship built on competition rather than support. But here's what I learned during these past 3 months, I continued. Real success isn't about being better than someone else. It's about becoming the fullest version of yourself. And real confidence doesn't come from having more than other people. It comes from knowing that you're valuable regardless of what you have. Caleb shifted slightly, and I caught his eye. He'd been watching this family drama unfold with the professional detachment of someone who'd seen wealth and success from every angle. But there was something in his expression that suggested he was seeing something unexpected. The Forbes article comes out tomorrow, I said, turning back to my family. By Tuesday, I'll probably have interview requests from major news networks. By the end of the week, my phone will be ringing constantly with job offers and speaking opportunities. My life is about to change in ways I can't even predict. I paused, looking around the table at these people who'd known me before I knew myself. But I wanted one last dinner where I was just Sophia, where I could sit with my family and remember who I was before the world started telling me who I should be. Diana finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I said terrible things. I was cruel and wrong and— You were scared, I interrupted gently. Scared that maybe your version of success wasn't the only valid one. Scared that if I could be happy without all the external markers you've worked so hard to achieve, then maybe those markers aren't as important as you've convinced yourself they are. The observation hit its target. Diana's carefully constructed identity, the designer clothes, the wealthy husband, the suburban mansion, the social media presence, was built on the foundation that these things mattered, that they defined worth, that having them made her better than people who didn't. But they're not unimportant, I continued. There's nothing wrong with wanting beautiful things, or enjoying financial security, or taking pride in your achievements. The problem comes when we need those things to feel valuable, when our worth becomes dependent on external validation. I reached across the table and took Diana's hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling. I don't want you to feel guilty about your success, Diana. You've built a beautiful life. You should be proud of what you've accomplished, but your accomplishments don't become more valuable by diminishing mine, just like mine don't become more meaningful by overshadowing yours. She squeezed my hand tightly, and for a moment, I could see the little girl who used to braid my hair and help me with homework before competition turned us into adversaries. I've been so jealous, she whispered. Not of your money or your career, but of how free you seemed. Even when I thought you were struggling, you seemed more comfortable in your own skin than I've ever felt. I resented that. The admission was raw and honest, more vulnerable than Diana had been in years. That freedom came with a price, I said. 3 months of people underestimating me, dismissing me, treating me like I was less than. 3 months of biting my tongue when I wanted to defend myself. 3 months of wondering if I was strong. Enough to handle being invisible. But you were, Mom said, her voice filled with something that might have been pride. You were strong enough. I nodded. And now I know something about myself that I didn't know before. I know that my worth isn't conditional. I know that I can be successful without needing everyone to recognize it. I know that I can handle being underestimated without losing confidence in myself. Caleb stepped forward slightly. If I may, Ms. Kingston, there's something else you should know. Everyone turned to look at him, and I saw a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I've provided security for a lot of successful people over the years. CEOs, celebrities, politicians, tech entrepreneurs. Most of them need constant validation. They surround themselves with people who tell them how important they are, how impressive their achievements are, and how much everyone admires them. He paused, his dark eyes serious. You're the first client I've had who seemed genuinely surprised when people started recognizing your success. Most successful people are performing their success constantly. You were just living it. The observation settled over the room like a benediction, transforming the evening from a confrontation into something approaching reconciliation. So what happens now? Brad asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than judgment. I thought about the question seriously. Now I get to find out what it's like to be successful and recognized at the same time. I get to discover whether I can handle acclaim as well as I handle anonymity. I get to see if the person I became in secret is strong enough to survive in public. I looked around the table one more time, memorizing this moment. The last family. Dinner where I was still just Sophia, before I became Sophia Kingston. Marketing mastermind. Forbes cover story. Silicon Valley success story. But first, I said, standing up and walking to where Mom sat, I owe someone an apology for letting her worry about me when there was no reason to worry. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume and the subtle smell of pot roast that would forever remind me of Sunday dinners and the complicated love of family. Tomorrow, everything will change. But tonight, for just a little longer, we were still us. 6 months later, I stood in the green room of the TED Talk stage in Vancouver, adjusting my navy blazer and watching the live stream of the previous speaker on a small monitor. The auditorium held 1,800 people, and somewhere in that sea of faces sat my family, Mom, Dad, Diana, and even Brad, who had flown up from Chicago specifically for this moment. Ms. Kingston? A young woman with a headset appeared at my elbow. You're on in 3 minutes. I nodded, taking a deep breath and running through my opening lines one final time. The talk was titled, The Success Experiment. What I learned by hiding my achievements, and it had been booked solid within hours of being announced. The video would be watched by millions, dissected by business schools, and probably quoted in countless LinkedIn posts about authentic leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Watching from the Stream Tech office, the whole team is here. You're going to kill it. Stream Tech had gone public 3 weeks earlier at a valuation of $2.8 billion. My equity stake had made me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined when I first reached out to Marcus through that LinkedIn message. But more importantly, our success story had become a case study taught at Stanford, Wharton, and Harvard Business School. The Forbes cover story had been just the beginning. Within a month, I'd been featured in Harvard Business Review, interviewed, on Bloomberg, and profiled in the Wall Street Journal. The speaking fees had escalated from $75,000 to 6 figures per appearance. 3 major publishing houses were bidding on my book proposal. But the most significant change hadn't been in my bank account or my professional recognition. It had been in my relationship with Diana. 2 days after that dinner, she'd shown up at my studio apartment with a bottle of wine and red eyes that suggested she'd been crying for hours. I need to understand something, she'd said, settling onto my second-hand couch with the careful movements of someone who felt fragile. How did you do it? How did you sit there for months listening to me tell you that you were failing and never once defend yourself? The question had taken me 3 hours to answer fully, and by the end of it we were both crying. Not the bitter tears of old resentments, but the cleansing tears of sisters who were finally seeing each other clearly. I spent so many years being afraid of not being enough, I'd told her. Afraid that if people really knew me, they'd find me lacking. That fear made me either invisible or defensive, and neither of those served me well. Diana nodded, understanding, flickering in her eyes. I did the opposite. I made sure everyone could see my achievements, my possessions, my status. But I was just as afraid as you were, afraid that without all the external validation, I wouldn't be worth anything. That conversation had led to others. Deep, honest discussions about our childhood, our parents' expectations, the way we'd been pitted against each other not through malice but through the innocent comparisons that well-meaning adults make. We'd talked about the pressure to perform, the fear of failure, the exhausting work of maintaining an image. Diana had started therapy. She'd begun questioning her relationship with social media, her need to document every expensive dinner and designer purchase. She'd even started volunteering at a literacy center, work that brought her joy but no Instagram likes. Brad had been surprisingly supportive of her transformation. "I married you because I loved who you were when we were alone together," he'd told her. That person was always more interesting than the person you felt you had to be in public. Now, standing in the wings of the TED stage, I could see Diana in the third row, her face bright with pride and nervousness. She'd chosen to wear a simple black dress instead of the designer outfit she would have selected 6 months earlier. The change was subtle, but significant. A sign of someone learning to define herself from the inside out. "Ms. Kingston, you're up." I walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, the bright lights temporarily blinding me to the faces in the audience. When my vision adjusted, I could see people leaning forward in their seats, phones recording, notebooks ready. These were entrepreneurs, executives, innovators, people who had achieved success in conventional terms, but were still searching for something more meaningful. 3 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My sister called me a broke loser at a family dinner. She wasn't being cruel for the sake of cruelty. She genuinely believed she was stating a fact. From her perspective, I was 31 years old with no visible achievements, no status symbols, no evidence of success. A ripple of sympathetic laughter moved through the audience. What she didn't know was that I had deliberately chosen to hide my success as part of an experiment in understanding what real confidence looks like. What she didn't know was that 30 minutes after she called me a broke loser, my bodyguard would walk through the door carrying a Forbes magazine with my face on the cover. The laughter was louder now, mixed with murmurs of interest and recognition. Several people in the audience had clearly read the Forbes article or seen the subsequent coverage. But this isn't a story about surprising my family or proving people wrong. This is a story about what I learned when I stripped away all the external markers of success and asked myself a fundamental question. Who am I when nobody's watching? Who am I when nobody knows what I've achieved? I spent the next 18 minutes taking the audience through my journey. The initial success with StreamTech, the decision to hide my achievements, the months of being underestimated and dismissed, and the gradual realization that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The most profound moment, I said, approaching the conclusion of my talk, wasn't when my family discovered my success. It was when I realized that their discovery didn't change how I felt about myself. The validation was nice, but it wasn't necessary. I have learned to validate myself. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces hanging on every word. We live in a culture that equates visibility with value, recognition with worth. We measure success by how many people know about it, how many likes it gets, how impressive it sounds at cocktail parties. But what if real success is simpler than that? What if it's just becoming so comfortable with who you are that you don't need anyone else to confirm it? The applause started before I'd even finished my closing sentence, building to a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. As I left the stage, I caught sight of Diana wiping tears from her eyes, her face radiant with pride and understanding. Later, at the reception, I was surrounded by people wanting to discuss my talk, exchange business cards, and share their own stories of hiding or revealing success. But the conversation that mattered most happened in a quiet corner with my family. "I'm proud of you," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because of the TED Talk or the Forbes cover or the money. I'm proud of who you've become, of the strength you showed when no one was looking." Mom just hugged me tightly, the kind of embrace that communicates everything without words. Diana hung back until the others had moved on to the dessert table, then stepped closer. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice both nervous and excited. "What's that?" "I've been working on my own experiment. Nothing as dramatic as yours, but I've been volunteering at the Literacy Center for 4 months now, not posting about it on social media, not telling anyone except Brad. Just doing it because it matters to me." She paused, smiling with a kind of quiet confidence I'd never seen from her before. "And you know what I discovered? The work I do there, the kids I help, the feeling of making a real difference. It's more satisfying than anything I've ever posted on Instagram. More fulfilling than any designer handbag or fancy restaurant." I felt a surge of pride in my sister, not for her volunteer work specifically, but for her willingness to explore who she was beneath the carefully curated image she'd spent years constructing. "There's something else," she continued. "Brad and I have been talking about selling the house in Winnetka. It's beautiful, but it's also enormous and expensive and kind of performative. We want something smaller, something that feels like home instead of a showcase." The admission represented a seismic shift in Diana's relationship with status and material possessions. 6 months earlier, she would have equated downsizing with failure. Now she was choosing it as a path to something more authentic. "I'm happy. For you," I said, and meant it completely. "I learned something from watching you," she replied. "I learned that the most powerful thing you can do is become so secure in your own worth that you don't need anyone else to validate it, even your sister." We laughed together, the easy laughter of people who had found their way back to each other after years of missing the point. As the evening wound down and we prepared to head back to our respective hotels, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The studio apartment, the late nights working on StreamTech's strategy, the months of being underestimated, the family dinner that changed everything. All of it had led to this understanding that success wasn't something you wore like a costume, but something you carried quietly inside yourself. Tomorrow, I would fly back to San Francisco to continue building something I'd only recently learned to call my career. The book deal was moving forward, speaking engagements were booked through the end of the year, and StreamTech's continued growth meant my financial future was secure beyond anything I'd dared to imagine. But more importantly, I was returning. As someone who knew exactly who she was, with or without the recognition. Someone who has learned that the most profound success comes not from impressing others, but from becoming so authentically yourself that external validation becomes unnecessary. Diana had called me a broke loser, and in a strange way I was grateful she had. Because in defending myself from that accusation, I'd discovered something far more valuable than money or recognition. I'd discovered the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your own worth, regardless of who else can see it. The morning. After my TED Talk, I woke up in my hotel room to find my phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. The video had already garnered over 2 million views in 12 hours, and my inbox was flooded with interview requests, speaking opportunities, and what appeared to be several marriage proposals from entrepreneurs who found my success experiment irresistibly attractive. But the message that caught my attention was from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, my former landlord from the studio apartment. "Sophia, dear, I saw you on the computer machine my grandson showed me. I always knew you were special, but I didn't know you were famous. I saved some of your mail that keeps coming to the apartment. Also, I think you should know, there's a young woman living in your old place now. She reminds me of you when you first moved in. Scared but determined. Maybe you could talk to her?" The message made me smile, but it also sparked something deeper. Here was Mrs. Chen, who had shown me kindness when I had nothing to offer in return, who had believed in me when I couldn't afford rent, asking me to pay that kindness forward. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside the familiar building in downtown Chicago, holding a bag of Mrs. Chen's dumplings and feeling strangely nervous. The neighborhood looked the same: coffee shops with mismatched furniture, vintage stores, the bodega where I'd bought countless packages of ramen noodles. Mrs. Chen answered the door with the same warm smile I remembered, though she seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than she had a year ago. "Sophia, look at you, so fancy now," she said, ushering me inside. "But your eyes are the same. Kind eyes." Her apartment was exactly as I remembered. Family photos covering every surface, the scent of jasmine tea and cooking oil, the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. "Tell me about the girl upstairs," I said, settling into the same chair where I'd once sat explaining why my rent would be late again. Mrs. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Her name is Amy, 26 years old, works 3 part-time jobs. Graphic design, I think, but nobody wants to hire her full-time. She pays rent on time, but just barely. Yesterday I saw her eating cereal, for dinner again." The description hit uncomfortably close to home. "Would you mind if I talked to her?" "I think she would like that very much." 20 minutes later, I was climbing the narrow staircase to my former apartment, each step bringing back memories of the person I'd been when I lived here. The person who'd sat on these same stairs taking rejection calls, who'd cried in this hallway after particularly brutal job interviews, who'd somehow found the courage to reach out to Marcus Rivera despite having every reason to believe she wasn't qualified. Amy answered the door looking exactly like Mrs. Chen had described, young, tired, wearing clothes that had seen better days but were clean and carefully maintained. Her eyes widened when she recognized me, though it took a moment. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're the woman from the TED Talk, the marketing mastermind. What are you doing here?" "I used to live in this apartment," I said gently. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you might like to talk." Amy's studio looked almost identical to how mine had. Second-hand furniture arranged to maximize the small space, a laptop on a folding table, takeout containers in the sink, and that particular emptiness that comes from not quite having enough to make a place feel like home. "I can't believe you lived here," Amy said, nervously clearing papers off the couch so I could sit down. "I mean, you're famous now. You're successful. You probably live in some amazing penthouse." "Actually," I said, "I still live pretty simply. Success doesn't always look the way people expect it to." Over the next hour, Amy told me her story. Graphic design degree from a state school, portfolio full of work she'd done for free to build experience, dozens of rejection letters from agencies that wanted someone with more experience but wouldn't give her the chance to gain that experience. It was the classic catch-22 that traps so many talented young people. "I keep thinking I'm doing something wrong," she said, her voice thick with frustration. "Everyone says to follow your passion, work hard, believe in yourself. But I've been doing all of that for 4 years, and I'm still serving coffee and walking dogs to pay rent." I recognized the desperation in her voice, the exhaustion that comes from trying to maintain hope in the face of constant rejection. "Can I see your portfolio?" I asked. Amy hesitated, then pulled out her laptop. "It's not very good. I mean, it's all practice work and small projects. Nothing impressive like what the big agencies want to see." As she clicked through her designs, I felt a familiar excitement building. Amy's work was extraordinary, creative, sophisticated, with an intuitive understanding of visual storytelling that couldn't be taught. Her logo designs were clean and memorable. Her campaign concepts were clever and emotionally resonant, and her technical execution was flawless. "Amy," I said slowly, "this work is incredible. This isn't good for someone just starting out. This is good. Period." Her face flushed with surprise and pleasure. "Really? You're not just being nice?" "I'm being honest. But I think I know why you're not getting hired." I spent the next 30 minutes explaining what I'd learned about the disconnect between talent and opportunity, about how the best work often goes unrecognized because it's not being seen by the right people in the right context. The agencies you're applying to get hundreds of portfolios from people with identical qualifications, I told her. You're not failing to get hired because you're not good enough. You're failing to get hired because you're competing in the wrong arena. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her StreamTech's current website and marketing materials. See this? This is good work, but it's safe. Corporate. Exactly what you'd expect from a big agency working with a tech company. But what if a company wanted something different? Something that stood out? Amy studied the designs with a critical eye. I could do something more interesting than this. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. I explained my idea. Instead of continuing to apply for entry-level positions at traditional agencies, Amy should focus on emerging companies that needed distinctive branding but couldn't afford big agency fees. Startups, small businesses, entrepreneurs who were looking for creative solutions rather than safe ones. But how do I find those companies? She asked. The same way I found StreamTech: research, strategy, and the courage to reach out directly to the decision makers. Over the next 2 hours, I helped Amy identify 12 companies that perfectly matched her skills and aesthetic. We crafted personalized outreach messages for each CEO, created a presentation that showcased not just her portfolio but her strategic thinking about their specific branding challenges. There's one more thing, I said as we finished. I'd like to offer you a consulting project. Amy's eyes widened. What kind of project? I'm launching a personal brand strategy business for high-growth executives. I need someone to design the visual identity, marketing materials, website, everything. It's a 6-month contract, $25,000 total, with the possibility of ongoing work if we're a good fit. The number seemed to stun her into silence. $25,000 was probably more than she'd made in the past year combined. But why? She asked finally. You could hire any agency, any designer. Why me? Because I see something in your work that reminds me of myself 6 months ago. Raw talent that hasn't been properly recognized yet. Strategic thinking that goes beyond just making things look pretty. And because Mrs. Chen was kind to me when I had nothing to offer in return. This is how kindness gets paid forward. Amy started crying. Not the bitter tears of frustration I'd seen earlier, but the overwhelming tears of someone who'd been struggling alone and suddenly realized they weren't alone anymore. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, and then let's get to work. 3 weeks later, I received a text from Amy that made me grin from ear to ear. Just got hired by a fintech startup in Austin. They saw the branding work I did for you and offered me a full-time position as their creative director. $75K plus equity. I can't believe this is real. That evening, I called Diana to share the news. We'd been talking almost daily since the TED Talk. Our relationship transformed from competitive to collaborative. That's amazing, Diana said, her voice warm with genuine happiness. You're changing people's lives, Sophia. We all are, I replied. That's what I'm learning. Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about what you make possible for other people. Diana was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About legacy. About what really matters. Brad and I put an offer on a smaller house yesterday. 3 bedrooms instead of 6. Normal neighborhood instead of Winnetka. We're going to use the money we save to start a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. The decision represented everything Diana had learned about the difference between having success and being successful. I'm proud of you, I said, and meant it completely. I'm proud of us, she replied. Both of us. We finally figured out how to be sisters instead of competitors. As I hung up the phone, I thought about the year that had passed since that family dinner, the Forbes cover, the TED Talk, the financial success, the recognition. All of it was meaningful, but none of it was as important as the relationships that had been healed and the possibilities that had been created for people like Amy. Mrs. Chen had been right all along. I did have kind eyes. But more importantly, I'd learned how to use them to see potential in places where others only saw struggle, to recognize talent that had been overlooked, to understand that real success was measured not just by what you achieved, but by what you helped others achieve. The broke loser Diana had described at that family dinner was gone, but not because I'd proved her wrong. She was gone because I'd discovered that labels, whether cruel or kind, only have the power we give them. And I'd learned to give my power to more important things. 18 months after Diana called me a broke loser at that family dinner, I found myself standing in the ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, surrounded by 300 entrepreneurs, executives, and business leaders who had gathered for the inaugural Authentic Success Summit, an event I'd created to explore what success looks like when it's stripped of pretense and performance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now hosting one of the most exclusive business conferences in the Midwest, with a waiting list of over 2,000 people, keynote speakers including Fortune 500 CEOs and best-selling authors, and corporate sponsors paying six figures for the privilege of associating their brands with our message. But what made this moment truly surreal was seeing Diana on the main stage, delivering the opening keynote address. My sister, who 18 months earlier had defined success purely through external markers, was now speaking to an audience of high achievers about the courage to redefine your worth. She wore a simple, black dress that cost a fraction of her former designer wardrobe, spoke without notes, and commanded the room with a confidence that came from within rather than from what she was wearing. Success, Diana was saying, her voice clear and strong, isn't what you accumulate, it's what you become. And sometimes, becoming who you're meant to be requires losing everything you thought made you valuable. The audience was riveted. These were people who had climbed corporate ladders, built companies, and achieved recognition in their fields. But Diana's message resonated because it spoke to a truth many of them had discovered the hard way. External success could feel hollow if it wasn't built on authentic foundations. 18 months ago, Diana continued, I had everything I thought I wanted: the perfect house, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, the enviable social media presence. I had all the markers of success, and I was miserable. She paused, scanning the audience with the same intensity she'd once reserved for criticizing my life choices. I was miserable because I had confused having success with being successful. I had confused impressing others with impressing myself. And worst of all, I had confused tearing others down with building myself up. In the back of the ballroom, I spotted familiar faces from that dinner, Mom and Dad, sitting in the front row with expressions of pride and amazement. Brad, who had become one of Diana's biggest supporters in her transformation. Even Mrs. Chen, who had flown in from Chicago with Amy, both of them glowing with the satisfaction of watching seeds they'd planted bloom into something extraordinary. Amy had indeed taken the creative director position in Austin, but more importantly, she'd started a nonprofit that connected talented young designers with emerging businesses that couldn't afford traditional agency fees. Her organization had already placed 47 designers in career-launching positions, creating a pipeline of opportunity that hadn't existed before. The most profound moment of my transformation, Diana was saying, came when I realized that my sister's success didn't diminish my own worth, that her achievements didn't make my achievements less valuable, that there was room in the world for both of us to shine without dimming each other's light. The applause was thunderous, but I was focused on Diana's face. Gone was the desperate need for approval I'd seen so often in our childhood. Gone was the competitive edge that had turned every family gathering into a subtle contest. In its place was something I'd never seen from her before: genuine peace. After her keynote, the conference continued with panel discussions, breakout sessions, and networking opportunities. But the conversation that mattered most to me happened during a quiet moment in the hotel bar, when the four original players from that family dinner found themselves alone together for the first time since that fateful evening. I need to say something, Dad began, his lawyer's voice carrying the weight of careful consideration. That night, when all of this started, I failed as a father. We all looked at him in surprise. Arthur Kingston rarely admitted fault, rarely showed vulnerability. I sat there and watched Diana tear you down, Sophia, and I didn't intervene. I told myself it was because I didn't want to create more family drama. But the truth is, I was uncomfortable, too. Your unconventional path made me nervous. I wanted you to succeed in ways I could understand and explain to my colleagues. His admission hung in the air, raw and honest. I realize now that my need for you to succeed conventionally was just another form of the validation seeking that Diana was struggling with. I wanted to be proud of my daughter's achievements not just for your sake, but for how they reflected on me. Mom reached over and took his hand. We both did. We love you girls more than anything. But we were so focused on outcomes that we forgot to celebrate the process. We were so worried about how your lives looked from the outside that we missed seeing who you were becoming on the inside. It was a conversation that had been 30 years in the making, and having it now, after all the success, all the recognition, all the external validation, somehow made it more meaningful rather than less. The thing is, I said, looking around, at my family, I'm grateful for all of it, even the painful parts. Especially the painful parts. Diana raised an eyebrow. Grateful that I called you a broke loser? I laughed, remembering how devastated I'd felt in that moment, how the words had cut through me like physical blows. Grateful that you forced me to confront what I was really made of. Grateful that you challenged me to find my worth independent of external validation. Grateful that you gave me the opportunity to discover how strong I actually was. I paused, choosing my words carefully. If you had supported and encouraged me that night, I might never have learned that I didn't need your support and encouragement to feel valuable. The cruelty of that moment forced me to find kindness within myself. The rejection taught me self-acceptance. The criticism showed me how to be my own advocate. Diana's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve that kind of grace from you. You deserve forgiveness because we all deserve forgiveness. We were all doing the best we could with the understanding we had at the time. And look what came from it. I gestured around the bar, where conference attendees were still engaged in animated conversations about authenticity, purpose, and redefining success. None of this would exist if that dinner had gone differently. Amy wouldn't have gotten her career breakthrough. The scholarship fund you and Brad started wouldn't have helped 12 students go to college. The nonprofit Amy created wouldn't have launched 47 careers. The ripple effects of that one painful evening have touched hundreds of lives. It was true. The Authentic Success Summit had spawned a movement. Companies were restructuring their cultures around authenticity rather than performance. Executives were choosing vulnerability over invulnerability in their leadership styles. Young professionals were learning to build careers based on their values rather than their desire for external validation. There's something else, Diana said, her voice soft but determined. Something I haven't told any of you yet. We all turned to look at her, curious and slightly concerned. I've been accepted to graduate school, social work program at Northwestern. I want to become a therapist specializing in helping high-achieving women who struggle with imposter syndrome and external validation addiction. The announcement was so perfectly Diana, taking her own painful journey and transforming it into a way to help others navigate similar struggles. I figure I have 17 years of experience with both sides of the success equation, she continued. The hollow achievement and the authentic achievement. Maybe I can help other people find their way to the authentic version without having to hit rock bottom first. Mom started crying. The proud, overwhelmed tears of a mother watching her children become their fullest selves. I'm so proud of both of you, she said through her tears. Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you've become. Because of how you've chosen to use your gifts to lift others up. Dad nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. When you were little girls, I used to worry about whether you'd be successful. Now I realize I was asking the wrong question. The right question was whether you'd be significant, whether your lives would matter beyond yourselves. As the evening wound down and we prepared to return to our respective rooms, Diana pulled me aside for a private moment. "I have one more confession," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "What's that?" "I was never really worried that you were failing. I was worried that you were succeeding in ways I didn't understand. And that made me feel like my version of success was somehow wrong or incomplete." The admission was profound in its honesty. Diana had attacked what she perceived as my failure, because she was actually threatened by what she subconsciously recognized as my strength. "You had this inner confidence even when you had nothing to show for it externally," she continued. "You seemed comfortable with uncertainty in ways I never was. You were willing to take risks and face rejection and keep going anyway. I resented that about you, because I was so afraid of not having everything perfectly controlled and presented." I took her hand, feeling the warmth of connection that had been missing from our relationship for so many years. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I spent most of our childhood and young adulthood convinced that you had everything figured out, and I was the one who was lost. I envied your certainty, your clear path, your obvious achievements." We both laughed at the irony. Two sisters who had spent decades envying each other for qualities neither of them actually possessed, at least not in the ways they imagined. We were both performing versions of ourselves that we thought the other one wanted to see, Diana said. "You struggled to make my success feel more meaningful. I performed perfection to make your struggles feel more justified." It was a profound observation about the ways families create roles and dynamics that serve everyone's emotional needs, even when they don't serve anyone's actual growth. "But we're not performing anymore," I said. "This is who we actually are. This is who we chose to become," Diana corrected. "And I like these versions of us so much better." The next morning, as the conference concluded and attendees headed back to their lives with new perspectives on success and authenticity, I found myself in the hotel lobby saying goodbye to the people who had become part of this unexpected journey. Mrs. Chen hugged me tightly, her small frame radiating the satisfaction of someone who had always believed in the power of kindness to transform lives. "I'm proud of you, dear one," she said in her accented English. "But I'm not surprised. I always knew you were special. I just didn't know the world would be smart enough to notice." Amy, now polished and confident in ways that went far beyond her professional success, handed me a portfolio. "This is the brand identity for my nonprofit," she said. "But it's also something else. It's a thank you gift that I hope captures what you gave me 18 months ago." I opened the portfolio to find a series of illustrations that told the story of transformation. A seed becoming a tree, a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, a single candle lighting dozens of others. But the final image was the most powerful. Two figures reaching toward each other across a chasm, with the caption, "Success is not a competition. It's a collaboration." "It's perfect," I whispered, genuinely moved by the depth of thought and care she'd put into the gift. As people began to disperse, I realized that this moment, standing in a hotel lobby, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by a chain of events that started with an insult at a family dinner, was more satisfying than any magazine cover, any speaking fee, any external recognition I'd ever received. The success I'd achieved was meaningful not because of what it had brought me, but because of what it had made possible for others. The confidence I'd developed was valuable not because it made me feel superior, but because it had given me the strength to lift others up. The authenticity I'd discovered was precious, not because it made me special, but because it had shown other people that they could be special too. Diana appeared at my elbow, her conference materials packed and her phone already buzzing with messages from potential graduate school advisors who had heard her keynote. "Ready to go home?" she asked. I looked around the lobby one more time, memorizing the faces and the energy and the sense of possibility that filled the space. "Actually," I said, "I think we're already there." Because home wasn't a place. It was the feeling of being surrounded by people who saw your authentic self and celebrated it. It was the security of knowing that your worth wasn't conditional on external achievements. It was the joy of watching others discover their own strength and potential. It was the understanding that success, real success, was never a solo journey. It was always a story of how individual growth creates ripples that touch other lives, how personal transformation becomes collective transformation, how the courage to be authentic gives others permission to be authentic too. As we walked out of the hotel together, Diana and I were no longer sisters divided by competition, but partners united by purpose. I thought about that dinner 18 months ago. The woman who had been called a broke loser was gone, but not because she had been proven wrong. She was gone because she had been transformed into someone who understood that the opinions of others, whether cruel or kind, were just opinions. Someone who had learned that real success meant being so secure in your own worth that you could use your strength to build others up rather than tear them down. The broken loser had become a success story, but more importantly, she had become a story of how success, authentic success, was always about more than just yourself. It was about what you made possible for the world around you. And in that sense, we were all successful now, not because we had achieved everything we wanted, but because we had become everything we were meant to be. The story that began with an insult had become a celebration. The family dinner that nearly destroyed us had instead transformed us. And the sister who had called me a broke loser had become my greatest collaborator in building a life that mattered. Sometimes the cruelest moments create the kindest outcomes. Sometimes the deepest wounds become the strongest foundations. Sometimes the people who challenge us most become the people who change us most. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to hide your success until you're strong enough to handle it, you discover that real success was never about hiding or revealing. It was about becoming the kind of person who could handle both with equal grace, equal confidence, and equal commitment to lifting others up along the way. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.